August 30th, 2023, 7:42 a.m., Stanley, Idaho. A fine rain stitched the lot outside Sawtooth Ridge Lodge when room 12 missed its morning knock. By 11:03 a.m., the keys still hadn't slid across the counter. At 12:17 p.m., Custer County Sheriff Dispatch keyed it in. Unit 3 Lincoln, 21, welfare check, mile marker 124.7 on ID 75. Reference Sawtooth Ridge Lodge. ISP Channel 2 annotated, ceiling 4,900 feet, air unit unavailable, deputy advised 10 to 19 if negative contact. At 1:29 p.m., 3, Lincoln, 21 reported northbound from mile 122. Two names on the ledger, Maya Rodriguez, 26, Noah Bennett, 29. They told the desk they'd be back before noon from Iron Creek. They weren't. What happened to Maya Rodriguez? And to the man who loved her? The radio cracked, the mileposts clicked past the timber, and the mountains kept their counsel. Within 9 months, a backroad discovery would tear that quiet wide open. The mountains remember what maps pretend to forget. June Mallory had been doing this long enough to know the difference between late and wrong. Late leaves coffee rings and apologies. Wrong leaves a room that feels paused, as if someone stepped out mid-breath and forgot to come back. When she unlocked room 12, the cool air lifted the smell of pine cleaner and wet wool. 2 suitcases stood tight-zipped at the wall, handles stacked like hands that never got to wave goodbye. On the desk lay a dog-eared field guide to wildflowers with a receipt from a Boise cafe tucked as a bookmark. A lightweight rain jacket slouched over a chair. In the bathroom, 2 toothbrushes shared a cup. A shampoo bottle stood open in the shower as if waiting for a hand that never returned. June didn't call out their names. The silence had already said no. She took in the small things that meant, "We're leaving today," and the smaller things that contradicted it. A pen left uncapped beside a notebook. A snack wrapper folded into a precise square, the kind of order people make when they're counting minutes. On the last page, a tidy line of print. Iron Creek, Sawtooth Lake. Out early. Back before lunch. Between the field guide's pages, she found a pressed petal, penstemon, purple drained to paper-thin gray. The intimacy of it made the room feel occupied by a memory that refused to sit down. She stood very still and listened, as if the air might offer a thread she could follow into the drizzle. Nothing. The parking slot outside their door held only a sheen of rain and a rectangle of dry where a vehicle's heat had kept the pavement warm. She dialed the number on the reservation. It slipped to voicemail on the first ring. She tried the second number, the same mechanical calm, a stranger's voice on the recorded greeting. She smoothed the bedspread though it didn't need smoothing, aligned the field guide's spine with the desk's edge, then walked to the window and back again because doing something felt different from doing nothing. At 4:38 p.m., she drove the shortcut to Iron Creek, that hard-packed lane that always looks closer on a map than it feels to a heart. The gravel lot shouldered the trees and held 4 vehicles that didn't matter. She read plates out loud like a spell. No Ford Escape in gray. A family zipped jackets and traded granola bars as if nothing could possibly go wrong on a weekday. 2 teenagers laughed and shouldered a cooler, their boots leaving cheerful commas in the mud. The trailhead board spoke in friendly imperatives. Carry water, respect wildlife, turn back before you're tired, as if common sense could outvote terrain. June took a picture of the empty slot where she had imagined the rental would be, as if proof might jar reality awake. Morning made no difference. The rain loosened into sun that felt borrowed, and room 12 still felt paused. June called the sheriff. Lieutenant Dana Mercer sat up at her desk in Chalice and pulled the thin file that would grow teeth. The first hours were practical. Confirm the rental plate, call the families in Oregon, pull the photos parents always choose, the ones where their kids look both ordinary and invincible. A state helicopter working fire watch swung a tight circle over Iron Creek while 2 deputies walked the first miles with their eyes on the margins where bad luck likes to hide. No discarded bottle. No shredded strap. No fresh slide of dirt that told a simple story. By the second evening, the bulletin went out, and the lodge felt like a set where someone had misplaced the script. Guests lowered their voices at breakfast, as if a loud word could snap a thread they couldn't see. June kept walking to the window and then back to the desk, as if distance and return were a ritual that could bargain with fate. She opened the field guide again. The pressed pedal was still there, faint and stubborn. Suddenly the abandoned things didn't feel like clutter. They felt like witnesses who didn't know how to speak. Searchers fanned into folds of timber and granite that turned certainty into guesswork. The weather practiced all its moods. Fog drew curtains, sun burned them away. A cold snap taught the river to keep secrets. Dogs worked noses raw along Alder and Devil's Club. Volunteers learned the vocabulary of waiting. Mercer learned every mileage between trailheads and turnouts until the numbers lived in her mouth. She told herself distance could be beaten with boot prints, that patience was a kind of force you applied to a map until it yielded. She told herself this even at midnight when radios went quiet and the creek talked louder than men. By mid-October, the first hard snow fell across Galena Summit, and road crews talked chains the way fishermen talk fronts. The command trailer shuddered. Red grease pencil lines on the big topo maps stopped short of the places where winter writes its own law. The case slid, for a time, into that quiet drawer where hope lives on ration light. June locked room 12 with a steady hand, then unlocked it again, then once more, because sometimes the smallest control you have is the only thing between you and the dark. She stood in the doorway and looked at the field guide, the jackets, the neat note, the silent toothbrushes, and felt the question settle over her shoulders like weather. What happened to Maya Rodriguez, and why did the mountains keep it? Lieutenant Dana Mercer's first calls went west, cutting through time zones and sleep. In Portland and Eugene, polite voices turned brittle as she explained why she was reaching out. Parents who thought their kids were somewhere under Idaho skies sat down hard at kitchen tables and listened to words that seemed to come from a distance. Missed checkout, unanswered phones, a trailhead with the wrong cars. They sent the photographs they always send, their favorites. A candid on a basalt overlook, Maya's hair in the wind, Noah's shoulder tilted toward her in that unconscious way of people who've learned each other's weight. In one clip, you can hear Maya laughing off camera while Noah tries to name a wildflower and gets it wrong. Lupin, she teases. You owe me a coffee for that. The normalcy of it throbbed. Mercer printed the images and slid them into plastic sleeves, faces she could carry into the field without letting the weather take them. What began to surface wasn't suspense fodder. It was the mundane weave of two lives that fit. Maya was a list maker with a talent for beauty. Her sketchbook held tidy notes and margins of tiny blooms painted in watercolor. Noah was the go-first hiker, restless to turn down the road no one else took. They met in a community climbing gym, both terrible at heel hooks, both delighted to find a partner who didn't mind being a beginner. He talked her into bigger views. She taught him to notice small things. If a fight happened, families said, it ended with a walk and a snack. The sweetness of those details worked like barbs. It's hard to accept that catastrophe can arrive in the middle of healthy love and clean gear. Mercer built a command post in the quiet corner of the sheriff's office, a folding table under the bulletin board where high school announcements shared pushpins with fire restrictions. She laid out topo maps like a card dealer who refuses to believe in luck. Deputy Aaron Kincaid logged tips, printed out lists of license plates seen at Iron Creek, and called hospitals along US 93 just to remove the worst possibilities from the air. Volunteers came with their own packs and their own stories of friends who'd once scared them on a late return. June Mallory drove in with a box of cups and a thermos that steamed the room awake. It helped to have someone in the room whose face hadn't learned the knot that police work ties around the eyes. 3 days in, the phone rang with a voice from Chalice. Earl, who'd been running a small gas station since before mountain bikes had fat tires, thought the couple on the flyer looked familiar. He remembered a paper road map sold to a young man with a mustache who kept glancing at a dark-haired woman as if the conversation were a shared dare. Back roads to the coast, the man had asked, something less busy than the main line. Earl said he'd offered the warning he always offers, the one that makes him sound like a storybook character until he isn't. Mind the weather and the private gates. Mercer and Kincaid drove the miles up the valley, the road shouldered by cut hay and river light. The station's security DVR, a stubborn brick older than half the deputies, coughed up a mosaic of frozen frames and static. It wasn't just corrupted, It felt personal, as if the day itself refused to be remembered. On the way back, they took the long route along dirt spurs, stopping where a shoulder widened or a gate hung heavy from a post. Kincaid photographed tire impressions with no illusions. Ranchers and campers wrote their own paragraphs into this dust every day. A hawk lifted off a fence, a piece of something pale hanging from its beak, the red tail catching evening sun. The land stayed beautiful and unmoved, as if the facts of it existed parallel to what the people demanded. Still, the idea slipped its way into Mercer's working theory. Maybe they hadn't gone to Iron Creek at all. Maybe a map bought for a whim had turned into new plans, westward by the stitched-together arteries of logging roads toward water. That night, in the lodge office, June spread out the belongings from room 12, careful enough to claim respect without crossing the line into tampering. The field guide, the notebook, the pressed petal. She tried to imagine the moment right after those hands left the page. People often think fear sounds like screaming. Mostly it doesn't. Mostly, it sounds like nothing happening for a long time. On her phone, a text thread blinked. Friends in town offering to make flyers, a church group asking what they could do, a teenager offering to comb a certain canyon because he knew it better than his attic. The slow, stubborn generosity of strangers lifted the floor under her for a beat. If careful, human investigations told without shortcuts matter to you. Keep this story close. The turn ahead is worth your patience. Mercer began to triage tips with a teacher's triage. Credible, possible, not useful, and the dangerous fourth category. Compelling but unprovable. She marked the map in colors only she understood, lines fanning from the lodge like river braids. The helicopter dropped them a favor on its way home from a fire check, circling the Iron Creek Basin while a crew looked for color where there shouldn't be any. Nothing stood out. In the woods, volunteers learned anew the humility of scale. Even a bright jacket vanishes under fir shadow 5 steps off trail. Dogs worked best in the meadows and worst in the alder. Every broken branch was a promise that broke back. When the press release went out, 2 names, a description of the rental, the last known outfit of a woman who had more important things to be known for, the calls multiplied and thinned at once. People want to help. They also want their guesses to be right. Mercer learned to thank and sort without letting hope or cynicism steal the oxygen she needed for the next hour. Late in the week, Maya's sister sent a new picture, not for the flyers, just for the room. Maya is bent under a spray of columbine, laughing, a thumb stained purple from a huckleberry she's just eaten. Noah's out of frame, but you can tell by the angle of her eyes that he's there. Mercer taped it beside the door so it would be the last thing she saw on the way out. It made leaving feel like a vow. 9 days after the first call, the storm that had been stubborn rain finally shook itself into early mountain snow and then let the sun through in a hard, cold light that felt like a dare. The maps stayed on the wall. The field guide stayed on the desk. The room kept its pause. And somewhere beyond the grid lines, something else had already moved. The first answer would come on a windless morning when the forest smelled wrong. Jonah Hale had worked too many springs to be surprised by the forest's odd perfumes, but this one was wrong the instant it hit him. On May 30th, 2024, the air along the faint 2-track felt syrupy, thick with a sweetness that didn't belong to pine or damp duff. He parked the state truck in a notch of shade and walked in the last 100 yards to BR 117, a registered bait station set back from a crease in the Boise National Forest. The forest was cool and quiet enough that he could hear a nuthatch peel bark. 10 steps from the clearing he stopped, grimacing. The scent was bakery case bright, berries and glaze, gone rancid under a sour note of ferment, like a summer trash bin left to think about its choices. He raked his eyes across the trees and eased forward, bear spray loose in his hand. The clearing opened in a soft bowl of moss, and the color blue broke the palate like a bruise. A 55-gallon plastic drum on its side, scuffed, its mouth vomiting a tide of dough and corn. Squares of purple-smeared pastry had collapsed into a glistening mass, the once crisp sugar now a wet sheen under a living cloud of flies. Jonah's brain did the quick math of violation, overbaiting, improper materials, a permit holder taking liberties way past the line, but his feet were already edging sideways because something under the sweet was wrong. He'd smelled it on winter-killed elk found too late. It was subtler here, masked, but it carried the finality of endings. He circled the drum, careful where he stepped, careful of the quiet that happens before a big animal decides. The flies were thickest near the opening, where the pastry slurry pooled. For a second his eyes refused to settle the pieces into sense. Corn. Dough. A wedge of dark fabric slick with rot. Then the pattern clarified. 2 soles, black and lugged, pointed up from the muck like punctuation. Pants, stained to the same earth color as the bait. Legs that ended where the barrel swallowed everything else. Jonah's mouth went dry. He backed to the edge of the clearing and keyed the radio with a voice he kept low and steady out of muscle memory. He identified the site, the coordinates, the find. He asked for Custer County, for ISP, for Lieutenant Mercer if she was in range. The forest didn't move. Time did. Mercer arrived to yellow tape and silence, her face set in the way people set their faces when rooms have already taught them the worst lesson. She nodded once at Jonah and then at the drum, and Jonah watched the investigator's lens click into place behind her eyes. Angles, footprints, the way ground takes impressions and the way men give themselves away by not noticing where they walk. The state crime lab took over with a choreography that respects both the living and the dead. Photographs from every quadrant. Insect activity recorded. The barrel's position mapped to the inch. When they lifted the body out, they worked as if gentleness could travel backward. Identification came fast because families cooperate fast when there is a hole to fill. Dental matches. The name that everyone in the room already knew but hadn't allowed to cross their lips. Noah Bennett. The preliminary report landed on Mercer's desk with 2 unarguable lines. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Post-mortem interval consistent with short exposure to ambient conditions. The translation arced like lightning through the case. He hadn't died in a fall or a fight with the country. He'd been killed. And for most of the 9 months since, his body hadn't been here. It had been cold. So, kept. The shift felt physical, like a gear catching a new tooth. The missing went from accident to crime. The search map went from broad to targeted. They were no longer looking for hikers in trouble. They were looking for a killer and the woman who had loved a man enough to press flowers and notes between pages. Who, for the first time since August, took up more space in Mercer's chest than professional caution allowed. What happened to Maya Rodriguez? The drum itself offered an old, almost petty hint. Near the base, under scratches and sun fade, a ghost of an inventory stamp surfaced when a tech tipped the plastic just so. Salmon Point Seafoods. That plant had gone bankrupt years ago. Half the state had repurposed its odd lots and salvage. A dead thread maybe, but threads don't argue their value in the beginning. The bait looked generic at first. Corn is corn anywhere you pour it, but the pastries weren't all the same. Among the collapsed rings and oversized fritters lived a distinctive square, weathered and ruined but still itself, raspberry-filled, sugar-dusted, with a seam that didn't match the national brands. Someone from the lab said, almost idly, that a Boise commercial bakery made a square like that for a distribution route that snaked through the valley. It went into the log with a small exclamation mark no one admitted to writing. BR-117 wasn't a phantom. It had a permit. The name on it belonged to a man who repaired his own truck, argued about rules in the ways men who live far out tend to argue, and produced the same kind of alibi that wilderness people always produce. Work, errands, solitude, no receipts. Ralph Dutton sat across from Mercer with the wary superiority of someone who thinks the law is a city habit. He said stations get poached. He said anybody could have used his number and dumped something foul there. He wasn't entirely wrong. But the smell of that day had rewritten what foul meant. Mercer drove back with the window cracked, letting wind comb the stink from her hair, and gave herself 1 minute, 60 counted seconds, to feel what the room had felt when the ID hit. Then she shut the grieving door and opened the next one. If Noah had been kept cold, there was a place that remembered him. Places remember things. They leak. 2 weeks later, cold, clear water would answer with a whisper. The lake gave it back on a morning that looked harmless. July 3, 2024, the light over Alturas lay flat as a pane of glass, the kind of quiet that convinces you everything beneath must be simple. Two brothers from Boise rolled a small aluminum boat off a trailer into a secluded cove reached by a braid of logging roads and a guess. One set of boots clanged against the hull, the other steadied the cooler. They'd chosen this spot because it was out of the wind and out of everyone's way. 30 yards from shore, something caught the sun, just a flash, then a steadier, rectangular gleam that didn't fit the lake's vocabulary. They both saw it, and the laughter in their voices went out as if someone pinched a candle. The older one said a plate number out loud, like a prayer, before he even made the call. When the dispatch hit, Lieutenant Dana Mercer felt the message find her like a current through copper. Remote cove, possible vehicle, water clarity good. She drove the miles with an ambulance mirror of sky running alongside and let herself hope in small, measured sips. At the trail cut, officers were already securing the approach, shoulders tense with that mix of dread and purpose that turns your mouth into a line. The dive team arrived quiet, all economy. Two black figures slid into water so clear it felt impolite to disturb it. On shore, a monitor flickered to life and showed another world you could almost breathe. Pale stones, waving weeds, and then the roof of an SUV, upright, silt-dusted and patient, as if parked in a lot no one else knew. They read the plate underwater with a wet sleeve and a calm that was mostly skill. A gray Ford Escape doesn't look like much when the river weeds have adopted it. But names can live in the thingness of an object, and when the number matched, everyone on the bank understood how the next hours would go. The winch cable hummed, the lake bucked, slime slicked the straps. The vehicle rose slowly, an ungainly animal dragged from another element. Weeds draped the mirrors. Water belched from the doors. It touched air with a cough and a groan and settled onto the flatbed with a shudder that felt almost human. Inside, it was ruin. The upholstery was a biography of rot. Paper had turned to scum. Coins filmed green. But the dash held its secret the way machines sometimes keep faith better than people. The GPS unit was sealed inside a module built to survive more than most owners ever ask. A tech with patient hands and a soft voice for hard moments removed it like a heart and packed it for the flight to Boise's digital lab. Mercer stood off to the side, arms crossed, pretending not to listen for the call that would come in a few days, because pretending is sometimes all that keeps a body upright. When the lab finally called, the voice on the line had the careful tone of someone carrying porcelain. "We have fragments. We have enough." The route there last morning didn't move toward Iron Creek. No left into the familiar gravel, no idle at the lot, no ping in the basin where hikers line up plans with the weather. Instead, the track peeled off ID-75 onto a web of timber roads, the kind you study twice and still get wrong. It threaded through cuts and stands, stopping, starting, pausing, then pushing deeper, until the last recorded attempts to handshake with the sky were stamped at the shore of the same cove where the brothers cast off. The car had gone where it was found. No one borrowed it, no one staged it from far away. It had been driven there by someone with all the reasons in the world to turn around and none they listened to. Maps talk to each other if you force them. Mercer overlapped the GPS trace with county records and let the colors sort themselves into truth. The last pings sat tight against the line of a private parcel, just over 100 acres of timber and silence deeded to a name that rang no bell at first because ghosts don't volunteer introductions. August Crowther. His taxes were paid. His licenses were nil. He lived alone far enough out that neighbors were opinions, not people. In a file drawer marked salvage and afterthought, Kincaid found a second name that sharpened the first: salvage auction, Salmon Point Seafoods, Misk, drums, pallet lot, sold to Crowther. Threads like that look flimsy until you pull them and feel the resistance. Mercer didn't speak for a while. She just let the 3 points sit heavy on the wall map where she'd pinned them: Sawtooth Ridge Lodge, BR 117, Alturas Lake. The triangle didn't make sense as travel, it made sense as design. June Mallory came by with a fresh pot she didn't need to brew at the lodge anymore. She looked at the pins and covered her mouth the way people do when they want to keep Hope, Indiana. "If it's him," she said, not needing to specify who him was, "do we go alone?" Mercer shook her head. The affidavit wrote itself with the calm of a storm eye. The lake, the module, the parcel, the drums, The man who didn't show up in town records except where money and land require you to admit you exist. It was late when the judge signed, but paper can be a kind of daylight. Mercer laid the warrant flat on her desk, ran a finger along the edge, and felt the old, reliable nudge of work that might save a piece of a person's story. She allowed herself one picture before sleep, Maya's laugh bent under Columbine, and tucked it back into the corner of her mind where vows live. Before sunrise, Boots would touch Needle Duff in a clearing where a cabin pretended it had nothing to hide. They rolled before dawn, radios low, headlights hooded by the pines. The logging road broke into a narrow tongue of grass, and then the dark gave way to a clearing so modest it looked like a shrub in the forest. A small log cabin kept its back to the trees, smoke barely smudging the early light. A hand-painted "No trespassing" sign leaned on one nail as if unsure it could still hold the world out. Lieutenant Dana Mercer raised a fist and the team fanned, the quiet choreography of people who understand that caution is a kind of love, for the living, for the dead, for whatever might happen next. She announced the warrant, voice steady, and waited through the long blank of no answer. On the second call, the tactical key turned. The first surprise was how unsurprised the man inside looked. August Crowther sat at a small table with a chipped mug, eyes lined like tree rings, a wool sweater patched at both elbows. He glanced at the uniformed bodies entering his house with the particular resignation of someone who has been listening for this exact knock for months. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't stand. Mercer read the warrant aloud anyway, because the law respects the ritual of words. He nodded once. "Do what you need to," he said, as if he were offering the house the way a host offers a glass of water and not his life. The search took the shape of the space. There was almost nothing to hide behind. A cot, a wood stove, shelves with the apocalyptic clutter of a man who buys in bulk when he comes to town. In the lean-to, Deputy Aaron Kincaid found a commercial chest freezer humming under its own breath. Inside, nothing, a sharp, clean nothing that yawned like a lie. Later, under the sweep of a blue reagent, the interior glowed the way a held breath glows on a winter morning. The glow didn't say who. It only said something had been here and then been taken away. Behind a wall panel that had been made to look like defects in hand-hewn boards, Kincaid's pry bar found a small locker. The lock was simple, the way arrogance is simple. Inside, a turquoise backpack slumped as if tired of being an object. Dirt had caked the zippers. One strap was fraying where a thumb might worry it while thinking too fast. Mercer unzipped with the slow respect people reserve for the personal. A wallet. A driver's license. Maya Rodriguez stared up from the plastic with the same quick, alert gaze as in the sister's photo on Mercer's wall. June Mallory, who had driven out because waiting at the lodge kept breaking her, pressed both palms flat on the table so she wouldn't reach for anything and disturb the order of the moment. There is a point in certain interviews when the room changes barometric pressure and truth crawls out because the lie has run out of air. Mercer set the backpack on the table, not between them, but closer to Crowther, the way you slide something back across a line someone crossed. She didn't stack accusations. She asked one plain question about the afternoon of August 30th, about a gray SUV and mud deep enough to cup a tire. Crowther's shoulders dropped. The words came flat, like reporting weather. He'd heard a motor near his boundary, took his rifle the way he always took his rifle, walked down to find a couple stuck where the ruts kissed the dish. They asked for help, a phone to. He told them to leave his land. The man raised his voice. The woman said please. He said the man stepped toward him, that fear was a reaction he didn't control, that the rifle never fired. He swung the stock because it was the same motion his body had practiced in 100 other tasks. The thud made a sound he didn't expect. He looked down and understood what it meant. He said he pointed the rifle then, and it worked the way fear always works on the people who don't deserve it. He forced Maya back to the cabin, locked the door, and then did the work that keeps a crime from becoming a confession for as long as it can. He dragged Noah onto a tarp and into the freezer. He drove the Ford down to the cove at Alturas and let gravity do the part he couldn't face. In the telling, he kept returning to words like mistake and panic, trying to sand their edges down to something less sharp. Winter came and the cabin held three kinds of silence. His, hers, and the kind that lays over everything when snow asks the world to hush. He didn't explain why he kept her. He couldn't. By late May, while he split wood, she forced a small window and ran. He searched the first day and the second. After that, the thaw became a threat. He drove the frozen body to BR 117, rolled it into a drum, poured corn and pastry over the evidence, and left the forest to do what he told himself the forest would do. He didn't know where Maya went after the window. He said it quickly, like a small mercy he wanted credited against a larger debt. He signed the statement with a hand that looked steadier than his voice. Outside, the clearing had assumed its morning shape again, indifferent and exact. Mercer folded the statement into the file and glanced at the treeline as if the woods might volunteer a direction. Somewhere beyond that green, the next answer had already been set down months ago, waiting for someone's dog to lower its head and pull the world toward it. They found the answer where the ridgeline breaks and the wind forgets itself. Early August, the teams worked the northeast quadrant from Crowther's cabin, 4 miles as the birds fly, much longer as boots must. The dogs moved like prayers in motion, noses low, tails writing their own shorthand. On the second morning, just after 9, a brindled shepherd named Lark Cut left through a tangle of young fir, stopped dead at a fallen spruce, and let out a bark that sounded like a decision. The root ball had lifted a shallow cave of dirt when the tree toppled in winter, and inside the cave someone had made a room. Branches stacked and woven. Moss pressed flat. A small circle of stones scorched once and then abandoned. On a ledge of gray soil, a smear the color of summer berries had dried to a memory. They cleared carefully, a choreography learned from grief and repetition. Mercer knelt, palms hovering inches above what remained, as if hands could apologize for arriving late. There was no drama in the scene, only the quiet precision of a person using what the woods offered and what strength still answered. A scrap from a rain shell, torn where fabric fails before hope does. A button. The ragged end of cordage nodded in haste. Lark lay down with her head between her paws and closed her eyes, work finished. When the medical examiner's team arrived, the forest stood witness while the delicate tasks were done without noise. Identification came by dental records and the ring Maya's sister had described to Mercer on the very first call, a plain band with a ridge like a tiny trail running around it. The analysis did not need to be cruel to be conclusive. Berry seeds and faint traces of spruce tips in the stomach contents. No trauma beyond what the country itself can do by subtraction. Hypothermia when the nights clenched. Starvation inching thought into slow motion. She had lasted days, maybe a week. Long enough to build a shelter and choose a vantage with a line of sky, long enough to hold on and then run out of margin. The report was clinical, the effect was not. In the command room, Mercer pressed her thumb into her palm until the hurt was sharp and simple and present. The charges wrote themselves, and still the paperwork felt like threading a needle while the house burned. First-degree murder for Noah Bennett, a deliberate swing and a life ended. Felony murder for Maya Rodriguez, because kidnapping is a fuse that keeps burning even when you look away. Kidnapping. Evidence tampering. In court, August Crowther looked smaller without the woods around him, as if the trees had been the rest of his body all along. He listened to the counts, eyes rimmed raw, and answered in a voice that had no more places to hide. Guilty. He offered no explanation in the way men sometimes think explanations are mercy. The judge's words were measured and heavy. Life without the possibility of parole. A door closed behind a man who had chosen doors for other people. Afterward, the room emptied in the stuttering way rooms do when everyone is trying not to watch everyone else. June Mallory stood outside on the courthouse steps, her hands around a paper cup she didn't drink from, and watched a ribbon of summer traffic glide past as if the world could bear anything. When she drove back to the lodge, she took the long way that skirts the river, and for the first time since August she let herself talk to the air. "I'm sorry," she said, words soft enough to be mistaken for song. In the office, she found the field guide and the pressed petal, penstemon faded to ash lavender, and slid it into a small frame. She set it on the front desk where keys return each morning and wrote 2 words on a card beneath in her smallest handwriting. Tell someone. The case did not close the hurt, but it closed the question that wakes you at 3 a.m. and demands payment in doubt. Families learned the vocabulary of anniversaries no one wants. The maps came down. The pins went into a cup and then into a drawer. Mercer kept one copy of the GPS trace in her personal file, a reminder that sometimes the machines remember when men refuse. She drove to the cove one evening before the light turned copper and let the lake tell its own version of silence. On the way back, she passed BR 117 and didn't stop. There was nothing left there the law could use. The forest had kept its part of the bargain, which is to say it had kept nothing except the truth it could not help leaking. The lesson is not complicated. Solitude can heal, but isolation curdled by fear corrodes. Plans save lives, so does telling them to someone who will notice when you're late. Technology remembers what panic tries to erase. And the work, patient, methodical, human, still turns holes in the world back into ground you can stand on.